Welcome to the Family Brand Show. We're Chris and Melissa Smith of FamilyBrand.com, husband and wife, parents of 5, and we want to help you take back your family and to live life on your terms.
And we know being a family can feel really overwhelming. Parents tell us they feel like they're being pulled in a million different directions. It's so challenging to navigate the uncertainty and all the chaos that's happening in the world right now.
And that's why we want to bring you every single week actionable tips and strategies that you can implement in your daily life to become a better parent, to become a better spouse, and to build a stronger family. And look, there's never been a better time and a more important time than right now to take back your family. You can define what your family stands for, or the world is going to do it for you. And the world needs strong families now more than ever. And it starts right here with your family.
So this week on the podcast, we want to bring to you a conversation that Chris and I have been having privately, something that we're trying to decide and we're trying to figure out. And we thought this would be an interesting topic to discuss on the podcast and maybe have you examine, how do you feel about this? And I feel like this topic is maybe might feel controversial. Even Chris and I have a little bit, I think, differing opinions, maybe one of us leans one direction more than the other, but it's a conversation worth having and worth talking about. And that is the subject of kids and their activities, their sports, or whatever activity they do. Our kids happen to play a lot of sports. So for us, it's kids and sports. And recently I saw online this post that I sent to Chris, and I just thought it was so interesting. It's from 1,000 Hours Outside. And she interviewed a woman who wrote a book, and her name is Linda Flanagan. In the show notes, I'll put the episode, but she says, miss some games. It's not in their best interest, your children's best interest, to go to everything. Model a happy adulthood and cultivate your own interests rather than feed off of theirs. Flee the bleachers, resuscitate your own interests and relationships instead. What do you think about that initially, Chris?
Yeah, when Melissa shared that with me, what's been cool is I've seen extremes. When I say the extremes, I've seen, we've known parents. We met this lady one time who's like, are you kidding me? We would have never done something so stupid when our kids were little, like put them in sports leagues. She was like, I didn't want to be spending my weekends like tied down and like committed. She's like, we wanted to camp and adventure and hike. And so it was like their kids played sports later in life, but she's like, when my kids are old enough to choose that for themselves, they can choose that. But when they're young, I'm certainly not going to tie myself down. And I was like, well, that's an interesting perspective that I'd never heard of, and certainly wasn't the one that I would naturally have. And then I know other families who they say, like, we live with travel ball and like, or like competitive dance or whatever it is. We live like our lives revolve around our kids' activities. I think the question more than anything isn't, do you support every activity? Do you sign your kids up? Do you flee the bleachers and not? I think it's really like what aligns for you and your family and what feels good to you. And sometimes that can be tricky to navigate because it might be a little bit different. You might have a child who's like, I want to play year-round club ball and do nothing else. And even as parents, you might be aligned with that, but you might have other kids who are like, that's not how I want to spend all of my time. So I think whatever it is, though, it's got to be co-created, and it's got to be a discussion. And what we have found is our children obviously love having us at their games and supporting them and showing up. And we found, though, if we communicate ahead of time, it goes a long way to just kind of create some really clear agreements around how many games we'll be at, how many we won't, or game by game, hey, here we won't, and here's why. I think that goes a long way. And I think for some parents, they're like, no, I want to be in the bleachers, though. Like that, I love that. Like I genuinely love it and enjoy it. And that is like, for me, also still a way like that I pour into myself. Or like when I go to a lot of my kids' away games, if it's by myself, I do kind of find that rejuvenating and relaxing. And I get to listen to like a podcast or a book. But I think the risk sometimes is doing it only out of obligation and like, we should be doing this and getting resentful about it.
I think too, there's so many little nuances to this, and every family is going to have their own way to approach this. One thing that was kind of eye-opening for me is I think we were in the middle, this was maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago, We were in the middle of a week where, because one of our sons is playing JV and varsity basketball, we had one of our other children is wrestling and our daughter is playing basketball also. We had 12 games in 1 week between the games and the like wrestling matches.
And that's not including any other activities that you also have, like with church or our two little ones activities. And like that was just sports. We had 12 games in a
Yes.
week.
And so, first of all, that was just a lot. And when you think about time, each of those games is at least 2 hours. I mean, by the time you leave your house, get to the gym, get home, it's 2 hours. So that's like 24 hours worth. Actually, more than that, because one of the things I'm calling a game was actually a wrestling tournament that was out of town, like a 4 hour drive away, which I went to with one of our other. But I just at the end of that week, I was like, oh my goodness, that was a lot. And even our littlest, who, bless her heart, anyone that has like many kids knows like the youngest from the time she's born, she's just basically thrown in the car and is like doing what everyone else is doing. But she, at the end of the week, was like, do we have to go any more games? And I was like, oh my gosh, poor Indy. Like, that's a lot. That is a lot of games. And where is the balance between supporting one kid and showing up for each other, because we do have a family value that Smiths show up for each other, but where's the balance of Smiths show up for each other and also like allowing one child to be who she wants to be and not have to go to 24 hours worth of games every single week and supporting her and what she wants to do. And so that's something that we've just been navigating.
I do think too, another thing that I'm realizing in this is I do genuinely enjoy going to our kids' sports activities. I can't think of a time where I resented it or didn't want to go. And I also think though, that's great if you want to. And I'm realizing I can though get a little bit caught up if I'm not careful in my identity and value as a dad is maybe even sometimes I think tied up in how well they do or don't do in sports. And I think that's
Hmm.
risky and dangerous as well. So I think it's just a useful thing. Like, am I doing this out of obligation? Am I doing this because I think it has something to do with my own worth or my own value as a parent? And I think there's also the circumstances where maybe we're not, and I don't experience this from many parents, but maybe we're not showing up enough. I do think though that the general rule of thumb, what I hear most parents is like we've just become overscheduled with kids' activities. There's this pressure now. You got to play year round one sport or year round one activity. And I do think there is some wisdom when in your kids being younger. One of the things we used to do is we would take one season off before it was like school sports. It was like, okay, either the summer or the fall or the winter. But like there was always a season where like we're not playing any sports and we're just going to be a family. And I loved the seasons where we were in sports or activities, but I also loved the seasons where we were able to just be a family. And I think that's maybe the bigger conversation for me, and I think for us, is not to get so overcommitted and scheduled with the good things that we don't have time for the great things and we don't have time to really be a family.
And I think it is tricky though, as our kids have gotten older. It's a little more complicated because it's like, hey, if I don't go to summer ball, then I might not maintain my position on the team next year on varsity. And I'm trying to, maintain my position on varsity. And that's another thing we're having a conversation about right now is we're wanting to make summer plans, but summer plans are also impacted by kids and their sports. And it reminds me of someone who Chris used to work with. She's raised children, her children are adults, and she said she used to like to take them. They were raised, I believe, in the city. She said we used to like to take them to like outside and go camping, like as many weekends as possible and just she said, this is what she said, knock the crust off of
The
them.
crust and the rust. Yeah.
And I want to be able to do that. Like I want to make sure that we're doing that we're having unstructured, unscheduled time together outside where we are, knocking the crust off, which I think to her, knocking the crust off, how did she define it?
Well, just like the world, right? Like the world and all their beliefs and technology and friends, it just gets this like layer of crust and rust on them. And then you take them out in nature and there's no, devices or screens or influences and they can just kind of be kids again. And she's like, and I could as well. So I do think that's really important. That I think sometimes kids are so structured in the world we live in today that there's also no space for them just to be unstructured, free, and specifically outside. I know you've been reading a book about just the power and the health, mentally, physically, psychologically, emotionally, of like getting outside. And the last thing I would say on this, I also think it does require an individual conversation with each of your children. Because look, some of your children are like, yeah, I really care about you showing up for me in all my activities. And some of our kids are like, "Man, I don't really care." Or I really care about you showing up for me in this activity, but not this one. And I've even found some freedom. Like one of our sons was like, "Hey, these away games, particular, they're not going to be very good games. I honestly don't come. Like, you don't need to come." It's like, oh, like I still might go because I want to, but I think we can just have a way more open dialogue around it as well.
I think one last thing that we've been trying, especially since, I mean, it's only been a few weeks, but since that week, our daughter was like, do we have to go to any more games? Is Chris and I did have a conversation about, okay, does the whole family need to go to every single game?
Yeah, that's huge.
Or can we support, or does it look like support maybe dividing and maybe Chris goes to some of the games, I go to the other the games, or like last week, Chris ended up going to a game. I stayed home. Tate was cooking and he wanted some help, like he was smoking some chicken on the big green egg out in the backyard and he was having some trouble. And I was trying to rush out the door to go to Tanner's game. And I messaged Chris and I was like, you know what? You are there at Tanner's game. Like, you have this. I'm going to stay back and I'm going to cook with Tate. And I could tell that that meant a lot to Tate that I stayed back. So yeah, that's something we're talking about. But I think it is good to be aware of like, what activities are we choosing to participate? How is this impacting the whole family? Are we still able to, have unstructured time together? How can we create more of that? So talk about that with your partner this week and we'll see you next time. Thanks for hanging out with us today on the Family Brand Podcast. But wait, before you go, I want to give you something. It's something I stole out of our Family Brand Academy because I thought it would make a big difference for you and I want you to have it for free, no strings attached. It's how we run our family meetings, and not just our family meetings that we have every week, but also our family check-ins, which is this system we've developed for how to connect with our kids and each other, Chris and I, every single week. And we've had some great outcomes with this. Not only have we, but a lot of families that have implemented this have as well. Actually, life-changing outcomes, if I'm being honest. You'll definitely want to get this. Go get your copy at familybrand.com/meeting, and we will catch you next time.